Die Sprachübertragung beginnt jetzt. Alle Teilnehmer befinden sich im Zuhörermodus.
Good afternoon and welcome everybody to our webinar Process-Oriented Risk Management with ROPE. My name is Valeria Groszecka and I'm from my Grafx marketing team. With me today are also my colleagues Stefan Hessenbruch, Director of Customer Success, and Katharina Hecht, Pre-Sales Team Lead. And they will guide us today through the webinar. Before we begin with the webinar, I would like to point out some organizational details. You are all muted and cannot ask questions via microphone during the presentation, but you can enter your questions at any time in the questions window, and we will go through them at the end of the presentation. The webinar will be recorded, and you will receive the recording by email. And now I will let my colleague Stefan proceed with the presentation. Enjoy the webinar.
Hello everyone, nice to see you or hear you. No, both not. Nice to meet you online. And I want to lead you through the first slides of our presentation. Before we really start with the ROPE system, let's have a short look about who we are. So iGrafx is a company founded in 1991, and we are one of the leading companies in the BPM and BPA, business process analysis area. And over the years, we invented various different things, like first user of the term swim lanes, what if analysis with process simulation. We had the very first tool that you could use for creating flowcharts and diagrams on a Windows operating system. And yeah, as you can see in the slide, lots of happy customers, and 2/3 of the Fortune 100 are customers of iGrafx. Who are these customers? We have several big names in our customer list. The most important thing for me here is that we are not stuck in any specific branch. So iGrafx is a very flexible tool that can be used for any kind of processes. Even if there are big names here, we are also targeting smaller, middle-sized companies. So whoever needs to have a holistic approach on business process management. What we want to talk about today is various things regarding the risk management system we have, the ROPE system. And what we use here is iGrafx as a tool for modeling all the information. So iGrafx is containing what risks we have, what processes, and so on. The goal is to have a common and centralized process and risk management. So risk management as of today is very often done in Excel sheets. So a risk manager is using that, but no other person can access it or have an insight in what is there. And we want to put that into a system where as well users and standard viewers can see information while risk managers are working on their risk assessment and doing actions to implement controls and so on. Frameworks are used or defined by, for example, the legal authorities, or you have regulatory requirements that you need to fulfill. So if you don't do that, so for example, from the legal side, we all are meant to pay taxes. If we don't do it, we get in big trouble with the law. So if we want to take control that in our company, every action that has to do with taxes are done properly, we need to know how the processes look like, and of course, connect the risks and the requirements that needs to be done there. And if it's important enough, also to create controls on it. So that's the framework in that all of that happens. The ROPE system has some processes that are predefined by Grafx on how we think a best practice approach would look like for a company. So if your company is purchasing our system that is doing that, it can of course be customized. We can change the processes in there to your needs. Let's have a look on what Grafx is modeling and how it's doing what we are doing. So creating a holistic overview of all that has to do with the business process management. So let's start with the strategies. The company's leaders have defined where the companies should go to within the next decade or so. So these are the strategies, and every employee should know these. So we can model it in our tool. Connected to the strategies, we have the company's goals, and these goals needs to be reached via the daily processes that everyone works in. So the processes are described by diagrams that are easy to read, and also other kind of documents that are supporting this. Who is doing that? We model organizations with departments, groups, and so on, down to the job level. So there is a job or a function that is doing something. Who is doing it? The employees. So we can model that too and make the connection to the processes so that a job description is directly connected to the processes where these actions have to take place that the job is supposed to do. Employees very often have also other roles besides of their jobs, and we can also model that and connect what the role has to do or is supposed to do in the processes. Now, with performance indicators, we are able to define where in processes we need to measure things, but Grafx also has licenses and a module for a real performance management system. That means we can also read data from other systems, put it into a visual dashboard so that you can use our performance indicators not only to document that something has to be measured, but also to lively show performance data. And that helps because we can verify if the goal that was defined by the management, if we are on a good way to reaching it, or maybe if the management has to do something to steer against the development of these measurements. Okay, with charts, we have another instrument of showing a lot of performance indicators side by side in one big chart if needed. We also have risks, and this is the area we will talk about a little closer in a few minutes. Risks can also happen in processes, and where do they come from? As I said before, there are requirements, laws, standards like ISO 9000, like COBIT, like COSO models in the financial sector, Basel, solvency, and so on. Tons of requirements and regulation that your company has to follow. And if you don't do that, there is a risk that you might get fined or get unhappy customers and so on. Now, requirements, if they are so important, we can put controls on them, implement the controls in processes, and this will lower or mitigate our risk. Okay, another area where we can help is modeling the IT architecture by defining what applications are used, what servers, databases, networks, what other IT infrastructure we have. Why is that important? Because these applications support our processes, and that is an important link. By the way, all the blue lines you just see are examples of how things could be modeled. We could also connect, for example, a control to a business application to define that we automated several controls. Like, for example, GDPR is a big topic right now. So there could be a control for access rights that is automated with an application. So connections like that could also be done, or that we, for example, have a risk on a server because it's old and it could go down any minute, and we want to model that risk for analysis. So that could also be done. The last points here, external agents like customers, financial institutes, suppliers that we are talking to, or exchange goods or documents or data. So that documents, data and stuff are called work products, and we can also model relationships here. So why is it important for a company to model all that stuff? Well, if you want to change something in your company because the market demand has changed and you need to change your processes to fulfill the new demand, you need to know how your company's architecture looks like so that you don't pull the wrong strings and get into trouble. And as you all know, companies as of today have lots of processes, employees, requirements to fulfill, applications, and so on. And these relationships can go all over the place. So it is exactly very easy to lose control over that complexity. And this is what you absolutely don't want to risk in the today's environment of changes that happen so fast, where you have to react on. Okay, so the next slide is the holistic view of the Grafx platform and what can we do with it. So from SAP optimization, integration with other tools, expert analysis tools, for example, for process simulation and so on. So we also have components like the process automation, risk and compliance, and performance management, as I also mentioned in the slide before. The top three components, performance management, risk and compliance, and process automation, we will use that for our rope system. So that system was created by defining a process. How should a best practice risk management in a company should look like? So that process was modeled. Then we implemented this process in our automation engine so it can really come to life. And now any employee in the company could, for example, just use a form to send in a new risk that was found, and then the process automation sends the information to the proper people, and yeah, the process is started and will run to have a perfect control of what's happening here. And the performance management module helps us to later analyze how good we are doing with our risk management, how many costs we saved, and so on. So most important thing for us, ease of use. It should all be web-based, so we are cloud-enabled, can be used through the whole enterprise. It's based on the models that are put into life, so the processes, and it needs to be scalable. So no matter if you have 10 employees or 10,000 employees, the system must just run in any kind of environment. So what we will see now when Katharina is taking over and showing you how that rope system really works, you will see a complete life cycle that we defined for that system. So from risk identification to risk analysis, over controlling the risks, up to reporting on the risks. All these major steps are put into life in the rope system. And yeah, this is all I wanted you to lead through to understand how these things are connected together. And now I put over to Katharina so she can show you live on how that works in the real environment.
Okay, so welcome everybody. Hello. Thanks, Stefan, for the introduction. So Stefan already mentioned that we will go to have a look into our rope system. That means I want to lead you through the workflow that we developed. So we will see live how we can perform the steps from risk identification, primary assessment, up to defining a control and how we do the risk mitigation. So what you can see now on my screen is I'm already logged into our iGrafx workflow engine. So there we have the possibility to automate processes. That means we are defining a human workflow. So basically the iGrafx process automation is a tool that can automate and have a human interaction. So it's not just a system interaction, but we have a human workflow where people can enter information and the information taken will influence the process flow and influence the decisions that we make in the process. So let me just start with the first part. So once I click the little plus icon, I can initiate a new process instance. And that means I'm now at the first step that we want to show, which is called risk identification. So always together with a workflow, we have typically something called a smart form, which is what you can see here. So the smart form is a web-based form where people can enter information. So in the case of risk identification, you might imagine you have some kind of intranet where you have a button, people can click on that button and then open the risk identification form where anybody can leave a risk. So once I enter the platform, I can see now I can select the type of risk. So it might be an operational risk that I somewhere identified, which is affecting one of our processes. I can also give a statement why I think that's the case, or I can already state the process that is affected. So it might be our production processes that are affected by the risk. And the risk that I identified are some kind of product defects. So I noticed during the last weeks that product defects are quite often, they appear to be quite high. So this is a risk that I think we are fearing. Now the risk identifier would also do a risk assessment. So here I can give a likelihood and an impact of the risk. So that means how likely? Well, I noticed during the last weeks it happened already. So the likelihood is maybe very high or high. I can select that. And the impact of the product defects for sure are also high, because once we have a product defect, well, we have to do some rework. Rework is always time, cost, and money involved. So this would mean the impact is quite high. And once I have filled in all necessary mandatory information, I can start the process. So what is now happening in the background? Well, I initiate the process, and the human workflow engine is typically a task tool as well. So once I created that instance, now you will see here on the right bottom that we have our process model in the background, and the activity evaluate risk has now become active. So that means once I finish a task, a new task is generated, and then this can also be sent automatically via email. So people will receive an email, hey, you have a new task, you have to evaluate the risk now. And once I click on evaluate risk, you can also see that this has to be done by the group risk manager. So I can open the smart form in here. Now we also see why this is called smart form, because it adjusts to the process step where I'm currently in. So I have to evaluate the risk as a risk manager. That means I cannot change certain things here. But what I can assess or what I can evaluate is if I have enough information. So the information given, the information I have from the risk identifier, is it enough? So I can say, yes, well, that's fine. Or no, so I can give a statement why I'm rejecting that and ask the identifier to rework on the proposal. So I might want to say yes. So in case I say yes, the process will continue, and how the process will continue is always in the background in the model here. So for those familiar with process modeling, you can see that technically spoken, it's a BPMN diagram in the background, modeling in swim lanes. So we can directly track who is responsible, and the gateway, the decision tells me if I choose yes, we are going this path. If I choose no, we are going this way. But for the end user, that's not really important, because the end user is just working on the smartphone. So I will receive all the information. Now I can say, well, it's enough. So I save the form and finish the task, and then the process moves on. Now, the slide Stefan was showing is not only about the risk assessment. So we identified the risk. Now we have made a pre-assessment of the risk. We want to finalize that assessment, but we also want to prepare a treatment. And this is quite important here, because it's not only about documenting the treatment, it's also about executing the treatment. So really to perform the treatment and later document that we have performed the treatment. And this is all to be done through the task management here. So finalizing the assessment, now as a risk manager, I can change certain things. So I might have the opinion as a risk manager, I have better insight. So it's not an operational risk, it might be some kind of compliance or financial risk. So I have the possibility to change that or to give another risk assessment. So I think, or from my experience, well, the likelihood of the risk is just high. So it's not very high, but high, which will affect the risk value that we give here. I can also give a financial impact. So once the risk happens, once we have the product defect, what kind of financial impact do we have? I can state here, for instance, 100,000 euro, and I have to select a risk owner. Risk owner will then be the person who has to approve the measures that we take. So in the next step, I will prepare the treatment actions, and the treatment actions are always, or in most cases, they cost money. So I need to have somebody, an approving manager, who can approve those treatments so that we can really mitigate our risk. For that, I have a second tab, which is now called treatment. And here I can prepare my treatment and my treatment actions. So that means in order to treat the risk of product defects, I might want to have a new treatment, which is called quality control, in order to assure continuous quality. So I can give a purpose why I'm doing that. And now I can define treatment actions. Treatment actions means the more actions I have, the more sub-processes are initiated. So imagine now we have our product defects. So we might think about a certain kind of actions that we can take. And one of the actions might be ultrasound testing for the weld seam. So because we are welding some parts together, so we want to introduce the ultrasound testing to check on the welding quality, because we noticed maybe that this might be an issue. So who is the action owner? Well, the action owner is now the person who will then get an email with an action summary where the person sees, now you have to implement the ultrasound testing for weld seam. So you have to think about that, you have to submit a proposal, and you have to perform this action. We can give this a planned start date. So I think the activity should start on the 1st of August. It should be finished by the 28th of September. And you, the action owner, you're allowed to spend 10,000 euro for that. So this is my estimation. This is the planned effort. This is the budget I'm reallocating. So I'm preparing the treatment here. Going back to the first tab, now what you will notice here is a summary of all actions in the background. So this summary will now state all the actions defined. So imagine we're not only having an ultrasound testing, but we might want to have another checkup of the assembly or a check of incoming goods. So that might be more actions, which sum up to an overall effort that we can state here. And now I can say that once the actions are taken, I feel that they have high impact on my risk. High impact on the risk means something good, actually, because high impact on the risk means a high mitigation value. So the control or the treatment I'm taking is efficient and can minimize my risk here. So with this preparation, I can now finish the task in order to move the process on. And moving on means now there's the action active, which is about deciding about the proposal, which needs to be taken by the risk owner. Before I do that, I want to show you what happened in the background. So in the background, we are running a system integration, and we are doing that system integration with our centralized platform. And the platform here is about the part where we can map our processes and where we can work on our object framework. So remember the slide Stefan was showing to you with all the connections and the icons on the slide. So those are all our enterprise objects, which describe a process and which have the possibility to link different objects to it. One of those objects are the risks, and whenever I identified a new risk, this is automatically pulled into the platform so that I can see here now the risk product defects. I can click on that risk and I can browse to the data tab and directly see the rating that has been given and the time the rating has been given and who is the identifier. So with that, and well, you might imagine we're not doing this only for one risk, but we have a lot of risks here in the background. So you see the risk identification workflow is used quite frequently. So with that and the assignment on the relationships, we are able then to create a risk map. The risk map now will state all the risks that have been identified and the process they refer to. So we have here the impact and the likelihood, and you can directly track with a color, is it a low, medium, or high risk, which will also help you now to better understand where you have to take your measures, because, well, we don't want to have the very high or the high risks. So the measures need to be efficient in that place. So this is the second step that we have now performed, and now we continue to go into the risk controlling. So we not only the risk assessment, but we want to perform our actions and later evaluate the risk. So therefore, I'm going back into our workflow. The activity decide about proposal is active, so I can also click on the smart form here. This action now has to be taken by the risk owner. So the risk owner will see, well, the risk has a financial impact of 100,000 euro. The effort to mitigate the risk with a high impact is 10,000. So what do I say? Well, I can approve that. If not, the risk owner can decline, ask about a rework, or just stop the process here, but I will approve so that our process can continue. Once I do that, now there's the next action, which is again performed by the risk manager, and this action is called Manage Risk Treatment. So what happens in here is basically now the initiation of the treatment actions. So we have several treatment actions defined. In this case, we have the ultrasound testing for the weld seam, which currently is planned, and it's planned for the 1st of August this year. So we might have the possibility to automatically start that whenever the 1st of August is there. Or I can manually start that action, and once I do that, I will automatically initiate a sub-process, which is automatically assigned to this owner, which I specify here. And you can also see the action status is now in action with the actual start date of today. So the action owner will get automatically an email In that email, the action owner will then see a quick summary of his action. So this more or less is what the action owner will get, or also accessible, of course, through the workflow engine. So I can directly see, well, I have to work on an ultrasound testing for well seam. Why do I do that? To which control it belongs to? And if I work on that, now I can give the actual effort. So the planned effort was 10,000 euro, but now it's a little bit more. So it's 12,000 euro that I need to spend here. Why is that the case? So basically the completion note, it was a little bit more expensive. I can leave here. So that maybe I can also give the reasons why it has been like that. So whenever I do that, I click on Save Form and finish the task, and then I have to wait for a decision. Wait for a decision means now the risk manager will now see a summary. So I can now see the action is in action. The actual effort is on 12,000 euro. So it's more. I have to spend more here, but I can still think, okay, that's fine. So I can confirm that. I can say, well, that fits. So it's fine to spend 2,000 euro more and confirm that, or I can cancel the action. And then we will not have an ultrasound testing installed because it might not be 10,000, but 30,000 euro, which might not be worth the effort. But in this case, I confirm the action with yes, and then have the sub-process terminated and can save this task as well. So now when I do that, I can work on the treatment closure. So now we might not only have one action performed, so for sure if we have 3, 4, 5 actions, we have to finish all the actions before we can do the treatment closure. So in this case, it's directly here, but it might take a little more time to finish on the other actions. So, but whenever we have the treatment closure, I can also open the form again. And now if I scroll down, I can work on a summary, on a conclusion, how I want to continue a further procedure, which is not a mandatory field. And I can also work on a risk reassessment. So now once we did the risk controlling, once we identified the risk actions and we performed the actions, I can now say that the likelihood of our product defects is not high anymore, but it might be low because I have this ultrasound testing of the weld seam. So it's lower here. System was implemented successfully. I can state here. So why just give another reason. And I can also change the financial impact. However, I have not changed the impact here, but I could work on the likelihood in that case. Again, I'm saving the form and finishing. And again, the last decision is on the risk owner. So the risk owner again has to work on the decision. So we'll see a summary, we'll see the risk reassessment. So we'll be happy because likelihood is lower, which means a lower risk value. So for sure, we'll approve this, can set a reactivation date. That means does the risk become active again? So does there need to be a reassessment after 6 or 7 months maybe? Or if I say no, the process is automatically finished. And then we will also see that in our workflow tool, so we can directly track it has been started, it has been finished, and when has it been finished. So now with that information we have about the treatments, I can go back again into our iGrafx platform because we also have our controls automatically defined here. So whenever I scroll down, there's something called quality control. And you can also see that the quality control is directly linked and mitigating our risk product defects. So this has all happened in the background and is now documented here. So what we can do with all that, not only on one risk, but on all of the risks that we have, we might want to have a risk and control report. So here what we see is all of our processes that we have, the risks that are assigned to it, and the treatment actions or the treatments that we have defined, and whether they are efficient or not. So that means, in this case, for instance, the inherent risk is at a value of 16, so the risk without a treatment, and the residual risk is at a value of 8, so with a treatment, it's a yellow risk. That means it's a medium risk, so it's okay in that case. And then we also can use this as a gap analysis, so we might be able to see where do we need to define a treatment. There's a missing action, so it can also help me in that. And then I can also state that, download data if necessary, and have a more appropriate risk reporting here. So to further talk about reporting possibilities, so we saw the reports on the risk part that we had, but now we can also use our performance dashboards to directly state and use data that we track in the workflow, because once we run a workflow, we know quite a lot of information. So we have all the smartphone data we can analyze. So for instance, we can directly see how many compliance risks have been identified, how many business risks, other risk types, what is the average risk value that is identified, and what is our expected financial impact or the actual financial impact. So all that data can be taken, we can put that here, directly display that in our management views so that people will have this information here and can directly track what's important. As well, we can see here automatically which tasks have been performed by which person. So for sure, we can not only use our workflow automation for just the risk part, but there's a lot of other use cases where you also have to document that you work after a certain procedure. So in that case, there's the possibility to have something that we call instance reports. And the instance reports are typically a proof that you did tasks the way they were meant to be. So whenever you download such a risk report, it might look like this, that you can see the activities that have been done, who has done them, so which user has performed this action, when have they been performed. You can track how long this took. So you have a lot of information you can work on. You can also work with remaining time, start time, ending time, and all the information that is in the smartphone is also tracked here. So now we've seen our risk process. So we started with risk identification, risk assessment, then we had a look into the risk reporting, then we talked about the control, the measures, the actions to be taken, the performance of the actions, and then further analysis and reporting possibilities. And with that, I would like to hand back to Stefan to talk about a bit more of the advantages, and then we can have our Q&A session as well.
Thank you, Katharina. And before we go into the next slides, I would like to get back to the question section that you can see in the webinar app. So feel free to place there any questions that might have arisen during the presentation, so we can directly go to it and answer it in a few minutes. So what you've seen is the complete system that we call ROPE, Risk and Opportunity Process Excellence. So what it does is, as you were able to see, a continuous improvement process. So you have a complete cycle from issuing a form with a risk that somebody found, going to the assessment, placing the treatments of how should that be handled, to the monitoring, and from there you can then revisit existing risks and handle them on a frequent basis, or always you can get new risks into that system. So that's a very important part, it is going through that life cycle in a very constructive and controlled way, so it does not end up in chaos. You have the audit security, and also the fulfillment of the different requirements is an essential thing. So you have a lot of things a standard company has to take care of today. So if you don't have a system that is helping you managing that, it is very easy to get lost in that, to drop things and not do it. And when we have a look to what is very often in the press right now with the GDPR regulation, for example, you all know that it can be fined in a way that it really hurts. So companies have the interest to better control what they have to look for and what needs to be controlled. Yeah, the monitoring also helps the top level management to have a look on where we are, how successful is our risk system that we have. So that is also a perfect piece of the whole system that shows the top level management and the sponsors that it was really worth the investment. And last but not least, the transparency also helps a huge bit, because any kind of employee that has the rights, and you have to give the rights to them, that can see where are risks in the processes, where are the controls, who is responsible for it, and so on. So no longer people running around trying to find out who has the accountability, or not even knowing that they have a risk associated by doing an activity. This kind of transparency helps people a lot to manage the whole topic. Yeah, so far with the slides we had, and now let's have a look if there are already some questions in the system. And maybe Katharina, if you already spotted one, you can.
Yes, there are a couple of questions. So I would already take the first question. There was a question about how did you connect the risk to a specific process? Well, I have not shown that in detail today because we wanted to focus on our workflow. But what we can do is we have our iGrafx platform where a business architect can work on a process landscape. That means the business architect can map processes, can create a process object, and then there's a tab which is called relationships, where you can link a risk to a specific process. So when we work with a form for risk identification, the risk is automatically pulled into iGrafx. So it is there, and then the process manager, the business architect, can link that to an existing process or define a new process. And when this has happened, when this is done by the process manager, you can then execute the risk map that we have seen and do all the further analysis that is there. One more comment here, it does not need to be a process, so you can also link a risk to an IT system, so which would be a resource. You can link a risk to our goals, to strategies. So there's a lot of enterprise architecture in the background where you can link the risk to.
Okay, another question was, how does the process support improvements or opportunities? Now, we talked about risks all the time. Now, an opportunity would be handled in the same way. That means if somebody says, okay, if we do this or that, we could help it here, but we need to implement something. It's the same handling as we have with a risk when somebody says, if we don't do something here, we have that risk. So initiated via the form, the risk manager can do its assessment, and and then have the view of, yeah, if we don't do it, what happens then? So if you don't take an opportunity, then this is a risk again that you can give a value with. So it's pretty much the same thing. I have heard from people explaining that a risk is the same like an opportunity, just with a different sign in front. So it's a minus for the risk and a plus for the opportunity. Okay, and another question was, what kind of license would a user need in order to use the smart form? Well, that comes with our automation engine. When a customer wants to have the rope system, this is all a package that you will get, where all is bundled into what we call rope. So the automation engine, the PRC licenses, and the PRC, the performance module, is coming with the rope bundle. I think that have been all questions so far. So I hope we answered them successfully to you. Of course, we are open to get in contact on a more one-to-one basis if needed. So from my side, that was all then. Thank you for your attention. And Katharina, some last words from you?
Well, thanks as well. I would hand back to Valeria, and yeah, hope to speak to you soon.
Thank you, Katharina. Thank you, Stefan. And also thank you very much for your attention. We'll send the webinar, the recorded webinar, to you, of course. And yeah, have a nice day and see you next time. Bye.